start. I was just chatting to a few different people from different areas. There's a lot of people from Caerphilly, but it turns out they actually know each other. I'm not from Caerphilly, but at the end of this, what I would love to be the goal is that you, similar to what Julian was saying a minute ago, was confidence. This whole live streaming world, the whole media world, and everything about it can be very daunting, and we don't know where to start or where to even make a path forwards. So hopefully off the back of this, you'll have a bit of confidence to move forwards to do something. I think it was Tim, is that right? Me and Tim were just chatting about how the church catching up with live stream, and we all know the scripture of God turns everything to the good of those who love him. And it's funny how a pandemic, something that, can you get any positives from a pandemic? Not really, but did it force his church to mobilize and to start things like live streaming and going online? I think it did. And I wonder, without the pandemic, would that have taken another 10 years? Would that have taken another 20 years? Which is, for me, I'm taking that as a great thing from it. So yeah, at the back of today, we are going to be talking about live streaming, but I'm also going to be talking about church events in general. So all areas of production, so whether that's cameras, lighting, sound, even musicians. And then we'll talk about things outside of a live stream. So me and Claire were just chatting around pre-recorded videos. So whether that is you film something on a little DSLR camera, I'll give you the terminology in a minute, and you edit it and then you post it out not live. So we'll talk about that as well. And then the foundations that link all these together, whether you're doing something on a massive scale, whether you've got, 10, 20 cameras and you're doing a big production event, or whether you've got you and your iPhone and a backpack and you're in the middle of the valley somewhere, the foundation of hopefully what you learned today will be able to transfer across all of it. I really wanted to quickly share about was actually one of the prophetic words that was just spoken on around streams. I think it's really interesting how you've got a lot of people from different areas of Wales all pushing some sort of stream. I get, live stream, I get it, yeah. Pushing out some sort of stream online. So whether that's your church and the flavour and the character and the DNA of your church flows up into the social media space, into the airwaves. Then you've got maybe some guys from Gateway over in, is it Caerphilly? Yeah, and maybe they're pushing up some sort of stream. Maybe you've got some guys in Cardiff, in Swansea. All these different streams are kind of ended up into the airways and forming a bit of a river and then form a bit of a sea across the whole social media platform. So I just thought it was quite interesting of you can interpret prophetic words and they can also have multiple meanings as well. And for me, I was like, I can see how actually multiple churches across Wales all pushing their streams to create a sea that all these people online are eventually going to bump into or find in some sort of way. So as we're thinking about that, I just wanted to share that off the back of some of the prophetic words. I wanted to ask, because I've spoken to a couple of people, hands in the air if you have done a live stream before. So a number of you in any format, whether it was amazing, whether it was terrible, whether you never want to do it again. Hands up if you don't know what a live stream is, if you've never heard of that before until today. Great, so we have some sort of formality. How have you found it? So obviously we're on the back of a pandemic. How have you found live streaming? Just throw a few things out, maybe some good things, maybe some bad things. What about yourself?
It's been good. It's been a useful way of connecting with people.
Yeah.
Outside of the church, they've watched in. They wouldn't walk in through the door, but they'll watch you online.
Yeah, amazing. So the reach is different, isn't it? What about anyone got any bad stories? Anything that flopped and really failed? Yeah, you got one?
What we're doing is definitely...
Do you want to hear it? No.
Inadequate. It's completely inadequate what we're doing.
Okay, yeah.
So I'd rather not do it.
It's just a whole world that is just like, what's the point? Where do we start?
Well, we've done it, but I just think the quality is just rubbish. So I don't want to put that out because it's rubbish. What's it saying about the church?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, definitely.
So I'd rather not put it out.
Yeah, I understand that. Yes.
We've got some hybrid services in our circuit where the service is streamed on Zoom as well.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how we can do that to live streaming. So when you've got a normal weekly service and you want actually to live it out, put it out there on the...
So that's something you'd love to learn today?
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, we can cover that. And if we don't cover it specifically to answer your question, just catch me afterwards. We can just have another little chat. What was your story at the back?
So we do an intercession thing at 7 o'clock every morning through the week, and normally it works fine, but we were actually not at our home, so we were somewhere else and trying to do it through a not so reliable internet connection, and it was just a nightmare for everybody, I think. So
Yeah.
it's some of those technical parts that are just really hard to try to deal with when you're trying to say something that can be a little bit more mobile.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, internet's the most frustrating thing. That's probably been one of the biggest issues I've encountered. Is you've got good internet, but maybe because I've done some streaming and broadcasting to different continents and locations around the world, and maybe your internet's fine, maybe theirs isn't. So then you're trying to play with balances to make sure it still looks good, but they can actually download what's being streamed. But yeah, yeah, go ahead.
We've had some problems with copyright in terms
Yeah,
of
yeah.
trying to fire something onto your YouTube channel.
Songs.
And you use a song and bang, all of a sudden it takes the whole stream down, which is mad.
Yeah, all these little details. Yeah, so copyrights. If there's a song being played on something like YouTube or Facebook, there's algorithms and there's certain software that will just pick it up and be like, "Do you have the rights to play this?" And if you don't provide that right, it will just stop your stream. That's a fun one, isn't it? Yeah, definitely.
You've got the right, but it doesn't connect to Facebook. Facebook doesn't know about the CCLI license.
No, it doesn't. And YouTube can sometimes be a bit picky with it as well. You can get a little flag. So yeah, when it comes, obviously what you guys were saying back there, how there's just, it's flopped and there's so many things you don't understand about it. I put a little slide together of when you're like, okay, I've heard of live streaming. Where do we start? And then you're faced with something like this where you're like, first of all, volunteers. They're always fun to come by. That's always a prayer, is God, would you give us the people to do this? And then you've got things like internet we just spoke about. Maybe it's staging. Maybe it's your stage design. What microphones do you use? Video switches, computers, cameras, editing softwares. And you get to that, you're like, I'm just going to turn that off and worry about that in a couple of years. But I believe, hopefully from today, you'll get a bit of confidence around, okay, you don't need to get intimidated by this. Julian was talking about confidence. Sarah was talking about, okay, looking at the people behind the lens. And that's what we're going to focus on in the foundation of, no matter what we're tackling on a scale of small or large, because that's a large scale. That's everything going on that you don't need to necessarily worry about straight away. So hopefully from today, you'll get an idea between the two. Will be good. So why bother live streaming? Or why bother creating digital content? So we've heard today off the back of some of the messages around, okay, the importance of it, and Sarah nicked some of my points I was going to share, but behind the lens. So we've been in a place where we've been focusing on the four walls of where we're meeting, whether that's in a chapel, a large auditorium, some sort of community hall, or maybe it's just a conference room. And you're used to talking to people in a room like this, and then suddenly now it's like, okay, we're in a pandemic, the room's empty. I've now got to talk to some sort of lens, whether that's your phone or like a broadcasting camera. So for me, for a number of years, I've been super passionate about that, because was it you saying 97% of Wales is online? So behind the lens, you can access 97% of the population of Wales, which is huge. You wouldn't fit them in the same room. You never mind like the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff. So I'm passionate about that, because also you've got people with different, maybe someone's got anxiety, depression, maybe someone's hurt by church, maybe somebody's just lost a loved one they can't face being in a room full of people. Suddenly they're accessible again. Maybe disabilities, maybe you're in a temporary venue where you can't get people in a room for functionality's sake. Suddenly they are accessible. So for me, I'm super passionate about what is behind a lens, because suddenly there's no like end to what you can do, which is this little fella here. I've also had people say, oh, well, what about like the Holy Spirit is moving in the room? Will it move behind camera? Yeah, it does. Funny enough, it translates. I've had a number of people that have been in different locations that the Holy Spirit has met just powerfully with them as they did with me in the same room. He's not confined to one room or one rule. Also, I've had people that have been operating equipment, so somebody that's been behind the camera or somebody that's been behind a video switch I can talk about in a minute. At the same time, really impacted by the Holy Spirit. So there's no limit behind the screen. Yes, there's atmosphere changes and there's different cultures, which is what we'll get on to, and that's what we want to try and help, is to set up a good culture and a good atmosphere for those watching online. Otherwise, what they get may be stale, maybe really boring. It might be 4.5 hours long, and social media doesn't work that way. You can't put a 4.5 hour video on social media and people be engaged as much. So we've also got a culture where everything's on demand. It's like, do I need to go into a church building when I could watch it at home? For me, and I think you were saying the same as well, Claire, is around, that you can't have the same community online yet as you can in a room. There's certain aspects of general church, like laying of hands and things like that you can't do online in the same way, but you can suddenly reach everybody and you can suddenly get into everybody's lives. And there's on that demand service, so people are on the way they're traveling, maybe they're here, there and everywhere, different countries, maybe there's different locations that you want to reach into, but they can't get to you because they're 2 hours away. Then suddenly there's on that demand feature to be able to, I can catch you on Facebook, or I can catch you on YouTube, and I can also watch it again at another time. So where do we start? The difference between live streaming. So you heard about live streaming. That is basically what you're recording and broadcasting. It's in real time. So as I'm talking now, if I was being live streamed, somebody would be watching it at the same time. You've then got pre-recorded media where somebody films something, they record it, maybe they do a bit of editing, and then they send that out some other time. That's not live streaming, that's just a different version of edit. You've got social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, and YouTube, all these different platforms that you can push out content to that enables you to reach all different demographics. Whether that's yourself on Facebook, whether that you're on TikTok and you like those sorts of things, you're able to suddenly reach all these different areas. You can do that through podcasts, you can do that through graphics, you can do that through videos, you can do that through even like little highlight snippets as well. As it's an on-demand culture now, so 30-second video is suddenly going to capture someone's attention as opposed to maybe like an hour and a half video as well. And then what I was speaking to a couple of people about is scale. So I showed you the image a minute ago where you had all the different words that you're trying to figure out how do we start. If you've got a phone in your hand that has a camera, you have somewhere to start. You can capture footage, you've got a little microphone, you can capture audio, and then there's also now software that you can have on your phone where you can also do a basic edit as well. And then you have the social media to post to. So suddenly the world and the technology is changing so fast, which Sarah was also saying about being agile. Are we going to be 10 years behind something that we could have missed? If you can edit a video in your hand now and post it online before you leave the room, suddenly church online becomes a lot quicker. Something that could have taken 2 days to put together, you could do in 2 minutes. So that agile nature is coming into play. And then you could scale it. Maybe you're a church of 2,000 people and you've got a bigger budget and you could afford to buy loads of different cameras, cranes, jibs, flying like wire cameras, gimbals and things like that. And maybe you can do a big scale production. And at the same time, that's great. But also if you've got just a phone and you're traveling into the valleys by yourself, then you can still broadcast and live stream. And then with that, what I want to talk about is there's this whole thing of perfection. So funny enough, the title of the seminar was Best Live Stream. There's no comparison between churches. So I know I know what it's like when you're like, oh, someone else has done something really well. I'm not doing it as well. And there's that comparison, which is a complete killer, right? It ruins any vision. But what you've got for me that's important is not perfection, but excellence. And the very clear difference between excellence and perfection is excellence is doing the best with what you've got. We can't ever achieve the perfect live stream, can we? Because we're humans, we make mistakes. Some things like internet is outside of our control. It might just drop. But we can achieve excellence. So if you're filming on your phone, you can achieve excellence. If you've got a £20,000 budget to get 10 cameras, you can also achieve excellence. So it's all scalable. So I'm going to go on to some foundations. Depending on whatever budget you've got, depending on whether you've got that 10 cameras, whether you've got just your phone, for me, these foundations apply to all of it. So number one, distraction free. I don't know if you've ever watched a TV show or some sort of film and something's gone slightly wrong. It distracts you, right? It takes your attention off it, and suddenly if you were to be told, okay, could you relay what was just said? You've got no idea. And it may be that there's a response moment or there's a specific prophetic word or a prayer moment via your video or your online stream, and something happens on there that's a bit distracting. Suddenly their attention's gone. So I'm passionate, whether it's live streaming, whether it's a physical event in a room, let's eliminate distractions. What does that look like? Paying attention to what's around you. So if you're on a stage and then suddenly there's a big massive fan that's spinning around and it's slowly going to fall over, and your eyes like, well, that fan's going to fall over, the fan's going to fall, and it's fallen. For 10 minutes you've been distracted by that. Or whether it's, I don't know, someone's clothing, maybe they've got something that's like untucked at the back and it's just flapping around as they walk, it's a bit distracting. Or whether there's distortion on the audio, so you're trying to hear but it's like distorting and you can't really pick it up. Or whether there's like a big light in your eye. These little details for me take someone's attention off what they should be listening to. A good live stream and a good event should serve a purpose where they can focus exactly on what God is saying to them. So distraction free. Then you've got serve the moment. Maybe it's a prophetic night. Maybe it's a preach. Maybe it's a worship song. Maybe it's a response time. Each moment looks different. So there's no recipe of, tell me what do I do best in this situation. The foundation is serving a moment. So music-wise or lighting-wise, setting an atmosphere. This big bright white light in here, if you wanted something to be a bit more responsive and prayerful, maybe bringing the lights down a little bit, changes the atmosphere. It relaxes people, it makes them feel comfortable, it opens them up. Maybe in the main hall there, if it's a response time, suddenly the drummer starts going for it and the sound system is way too loud. Suddenly, if you're being prayed for, you're caring more about how loud the drummer is than suddenly what someone's praying for you. But at the same time, if it's really, really quiet, and like the sound system's too quiet and somebody's praying over and you're like, oh, can you be quieter because everyone can hear what you're praying? It's the same, so it's serving the moment. There's a balance, distraction, too loud, too quiet, both are distracting. So yeah, whether it's with your phone, whether it's in a big auditorium, serving the moment. Then you've got consistency. So maybe one week you've got a couple of volunteers and the stream is looking pretty good. And then the next week you've got to get somebody else because they're not available. Suddenly the quality drops. If you've got somebody that is online, a lot of the time with social media, you have people watching you for a long time before you realize that they are. So suddenly like, oh, there's only 4 people commenting. You could have 30, 40 people that are actually watching your stream or tuning into everything you're doing, but they're not engaging yet because they're testing it. I think Sarah was saying about there is that there's that try before you buy culture now. So somebody will be like, oh, that church's online again. I'm just going to watch them because I don't want them to know that I'm watching them, but I'm not going to engage with them. So there's that consistency. If they suddenly see then a drop, they'll be like, oh, it's a bit inconsistent or it's very distracting. I don't want to keep engaging in this. So how do we do that? Through team training, equipping. So if you can get that one volunteer and you can pray, God, would you send me somebody that can at least just turn something on? I can work with them and then we can see where we go. A quick testimony. I had somebody come and join one of my teams and it was in the area of video switching, which is basically when you've got a number of cameras, you can plug them all into something and you can cut between all the cameras live. That's called video switching. And she came to me, she's like, I'm willing, I'm hungry to learn, and I want to join production team, which is what we call our like events team. I was like, great. Do you have any technical background? She's like, no, I struggle to turn my phone on. I was like, great. God, you're going to teach me grace, patience, but also I pray you're going to really help this person. She was so keen and she was so eager and so willing. I don't know about you, but God equips the willing, right? If you'll say, God, yeah, I'm willing, my answer is yes. His Holy Spirit will give you the gifts and the ability to do it. So she came in, we taught her everything that we could. We told her, hey, this is why we do what we do, which I'll get on into a minute. And she learned it. And she became one of the best video switchers I have ever had on my team. And that's testimony to God, firstly, but testimony to her willingness. So I think sometimes you can look at a room full of people and be like, I know maybe one of you can turn something on, but the rest of you, I'm not really hopeful. But it's like, hey, hands up if you're willing. And if the whole room, or even just 5, 6 people put their hands up, be like, yeah, I'm willing to learn. Great, you can work with that. You can work with the willing. If somebody's got all the knowledge and they're not willing, that's even more hard work, right? Reflective of who we are. So we're all from different churches, right? Different places. Maybe we've even come from different nations. And we have different characters, maybe slightly different DNAs, but it's all on the same foundation, isn't it? We all believe the same Bible. We all believe that Jesus died and rose to life. But we shouldn't all try to be the same bottle. We shouldn't all try and be the same brand, because I believe there's different people we need to reach, different ages, different demographics. So it's being confident and like, God, I believe you've called us to reach this demographic. Be confident in that. Don't compare to somebody else's demographic. So reflect who you are, but also, I don't know about you, but Jesus set me free and I'm saved, which is amazing. So I want to shout about that. And there's a joy that comes with that. So I think also in terms of what we're producing, there should be an element of energy. There should be an element of joy. So I think when people come across the church online, what are they seeing? Are they seeing something that's like, oh yeah, the church is really dying off, isn't it? It lacks no passion. I don't know about you, but I want people to come across and be like, I just saw somebody get healed. I just, like June was saying, the testimony is like, I just heard about this lady that sold big issue copies, come and completely get healed. And then the way that you communicate that, I think they also mentioned as well, the language you use. All these different elements are really important, because if you're watching a video on social media, everyone is shouting on social media. We've all got those people complaining about something. And we've also got those brands that are trying to push adverts in your face. And they're like, yeah, buy our new crazy drink, or yeah, buy this packet of crisps, or this shaving foam, or something like that. And then suddenly the church pops up. What sort of angle is it taking? What sort of energy is it taking? I think we've got the best thing to shout about, right? Like, we've been saved. There's nothing better than that. And then the last one on this bit is engagement. Super important with social media, as I was just mentioning. If you're just sticking up a camera in the corner of your, whether you call it auditorium, your chapel, your hall, and just be like, great, we'll capture that and live streaming it, and then we've done it. I don't know about you, but I've been there before. I'm sure there's a number of us that have. It's not engaging. They're so far away, they can't really see what's going on. It feels like they're just like a spy in the wall, maybe like a CCTV camera. Or suddenly, if you were to film somebody up close and they're looking directly down the lens and addressing people behind the camera, suddenly you're engaged. But then also the length of it, If you're going to talk on for 3-4 hours, somebody online isn't going to watch that whole video. Whereas if you're able to then change the way and the length that you do things, they're going to be more engaged, which leads to this engagement. So audience. So hands up if you're, I don't think anybody in here is under the age of 20. No. Hands up if you're under the age of 40. Great. Hands up if you're then between 40 and 60. Hands up if you're then 60 and above. Amazing. Come on, exciting. So each one of you guys would be a different audience. So the way that you would receive a video online would be completely different to yourself and yourself at the back. So realizing the audience, the language that you use, the platform. So some people have never heard of TikTok or Snapchat. Some people have never heard of YouTube. Some people use solely Facebook. Some people love Twitter. So it's like, okay, what audience are we taking? Because each social media platform has a different purpose and a different audience as well. So if I wanted to reach the demographic of 60 and above, I'm probably going to go to Facebook as a social media platform out of all the other ones. If I want to reach 20 and below, I'll probably go to TikTok or to Snapchat and to things like that. So it's looking at what audience. But then if you're going to go to TikTok, you're not even allowed to post a 4-hour video, never mind want to. And it's the same with like Instagram and things like that. You can't post more than 1.5 minutes on an Instagram reel. Don't worry if you didn't know what it is. So it's looking at the audience and how that you address that. Length of material, language used. So if you wanted to reach everyone across the whole of the valleys or the whole of Wales, and you're talking about, hey, come and join us in half an hour's time down there, like, I can't come and join you. I'm 3.5 hours away. So it's looking at the language that they use. Maybe you want to do something that's a bit more tailored to those online that can't be with you, as opposed to the ones that you're just trying to reach that are in your community. So it's just been thinking about it, because I think you can get up on stage and be like, great, there's a camera, we carry on as normal and we're live streaming. Actually, suddenly the people behind you aren't in the same location as you, and suddenly the things that are relevant to them isn't the same as those that are in the room, which says relevance. And then event flow and planning is so important. If you're used to just getting up on a stage, or whether that's in a chapel again, hall, auditorium, and you just go for it free flow because it works in the room, suddenly online people need to be led, and suddenly online they need to feel like there's some sort of structure and plan. There's flexibility. If the Holy Spirit starts doing something, yeah, go with it. But it's more that, okay, after the song finishes, what happens? Because the camera is just filming the same spot. So there's suddenly a 17-second gap while somebody kind of walks down the stage and somebody walks back up and there's no music and it's silent. When you're online, it's dead space because they can't see the whole room. They just see this. They see that little frame. So it's looking at all those little bits and be like, okay, what do we do once the preacher's finished? How do we transition? So I think you were saying about was it yourself toppling tailing videos of someone talking at the start and at the end. So that's like a flow of event. So you want somebody to introduce it, then you've got your like whatever you want to do in the middle, and then somebody to finish it at the end. Because often if you're in the room, like, okay, we're going to say goodbye to you online, you're still in the room. At the end of that online, laptop closes. What happens now? Is there a next step for them? Like it's leading those people online to be like, okay, where do you go next? Where can we point you? If you need community, where do you go? If you need prayer, where do you go? So it's looking at a next step off the back of what you do.
With the audience,
Yeah.
because so many churches are cross-generational, that makes it tricky then to just live stream over all platforms. I mean,
It's a fun one, isn't it? Yeah, it's a fun one because it's also the same in the room, isn't it? It's like, how loud do you have the music? Do you want to cater for people that love it loud? Do you want to cater for people that don't like it loud? It's the same sort of...
question, isn't it?
It's the same thing. So you can... This is where post-production, which I'll talk about shortly, is key, because you could record your whole event and then you can then edit it down and send it out in different formats for different platforms.
For live.
So then if you're doing it live, then in a way you have to kind of think, okay, again, I've got something in a second which will show you, but what's your end goal? And when you know what your end goal is, then work backwards from there. So I think it's okay, if you want to reach everybody on Facebook, then I'd be saying, okay, let's make it shorter, keep it generic, not addressing certain demographics, and be like, hey, we're so grateful that you've joined us today, no matter where you're joining us from, no matter what age group you're joining us from, we're so grateful that you've come to join us, and then keeping it punchy, keeping them involved, and making sure that the way that you do the event in some form will relate. It's the same thing with a preach. You can address every demographic through the Holy Spirit because he'll translate it into something that's relevant to their life. So I believe through that, people will pick out things, but you do have to be a bit more general if you're live streaming. and you'll find, I think, a general demographic will focus in on you, and then you'll be like, okay, this seems to be who we're hitting, and whether you're happy with that or not.
Course reduction, you could always make it more specific.
Yeah. So you could get a 2-minute highlight video from your preach and send that out on Facebook, and that will do something different. Or you could do a 30-second reel of somebody's testimony, like Julian was saying, put that on Instagram. TikTok could just be a couple of seconds of maybe, I don't know, somebody getting saved or something like that. You can post that. Maybe YouTube, you could do your whole event. So that you can do different things for different platforms. And then this next one, which, here's the slide I was about to say. This one's for you. Intentionality. A lot of us start this end. We produced something great. Okay, what format do we need this in? And then it's like, I don't know, is it HD? Does it need to be lower resolution? Actually, who do we want to watch this? What audience is it? Do we want everyone to see this? Maybe we could put it down this route, or maybe we could try and scoop those guys to watch it. And then be like, what do we want to happen out the back of this? So a lot of us do the wrong way. If you turn that on its head, okay, what's your goal? I want to see students come to church. I want to see students come to know Jesus. Great. That's your audience. You want to see them get saved. Your audience is students. Format, okay, students, shorter attention span, let's be honest. Social media platforms, things like more instant, Instagram, TikTok, things that are short, condensed, on demand. So your format needs to be small. It needs to be short, it needs to be punchy, it needs to be energized, it needs to get their attention. And then your execution, in the same sort of way, condensing it. So you change that whole thing around. If we looked at a different audience and a different goal, maybe you wanted to reach into some lonely care homes, some people that have, like, family members have abandoned, they're not around, and we want to reach everybody, right? We want to reach everybody behind the lens. So maybe people in a care home, you're like, okay, our goal is to bring the gospel to care homes. Audience is maybe the elderly or the lonely or those that can't support themselves and they've got to be there. Format, I imagine, and I'm not just saying this, I think they would be happy to watch something a lot longer. They'd like something a bit more in depth. They'd potentially like something that's got more story. They'd like to probably get to know who's speaking to them before they can kind of take something away from it. And then the execution is, your length is different. Maybe it's not in your face, intense, short, sharp, punchy. Maybe it's toned down a little bit because you're reaching a different generation. So then why? Over time, as I think Sarah was saying as well, we need to be agile. Over time, the method of how we produce events, content and live streaming will change. 20 years' time, I'm not going to be stood here saying the same technology, but I'm going to be saying the same principles. So those foundations won't change. So we still want to remove distractions. We still want people to hear the gospel. We want them to be set free. Those things don't change. The Bible doesn't change. The gospel doesn't change. But how we do it does, and why, and what we do does. So whenever I'm training people, whenever you're going to be, say you've got your first volunteer, like, great, I'm going to show you how to use a camera. Showing them how to use a camera is great. Explaining why we're using a camera is better. So hopefully a lot of people can relate to these two things. OHPs, yeah? Overhead projectors?
Wow, yeah.
Come on. On the left, you've got an overhead projector. On the right, this is an LED wall. Some of you may know what it is, some of you may not. And it's basically, imagine a ginormous TV screen. Let's go with that. The what is very different. You can obviously tell. But the why is exactly the same. So what did the overhead projector do? It meant people could worship because they could read the lyrics. It meant that people could tune in and be like, I get to worship because I know what I'm singing. What does this giant LED wall do that's like 21st century? Provides lyrics so people can worship. So the reason why is exactly the same. And like Sarah was saying, if we can free up within that framework, that creativity, be like, hey, I want you to reach people online. Why? Because at the moment, that's the method that is expanding. It's like, okay, we also want to make disciples of all nations. We want the gospel to travel everywhere. That's what we want. Go for it. They're going to come across new social media platforms. They're going to come across new technology that I won't. And if I only told them just use the camera, in 20 years' time, they're going to stay using the camera. So it's explaining, okay, this is why we do what we do, not just what we do. And it's remaining agile. So as new technologies come in, like virtual reality, things like that, or like 3D kind of came and went and didn't really do a huge amount. Maybe it will come back. But things like that come in. It's like, okay, how can we reach people now? Could we have it that somebody puts a headset on and suddenly they're in the middle of a preach in a congregation? Maybe. Like, these technologies come and go. So if we can explain this is why we do what we do, the method will change. So then, obviously, I spoke about, the title of the session is Your Best Live Stream. So let's talk about a couple of things. So if you have your phone, you have a camera on it, something like this. What you see on that picture is called your frame. I'm going to go super basic, so apologies if you know way more than this. That's called your frame. So if I put my hand here, my hand is in frame. Like this lady. Here's another example. Everybody's live stream will look different to each other's. We talked about event flow and planning. We talked about the audience. So some basics then is, okay, clear picture quality. So if something is really, really blurry, or something's really pixelated, or there's like a scratch on their lens or something like that, it's like, I kind of got half of it until the preacher walked into where the scratch was, and I didn't see the rest. So these are some like top tips of just basics to do something well. So clear picture quality. If you can get HD, great. If you can get 4K, great. But just something that is clear. You want to be aware of what's visible on camera. Has anybody heard of those stories where somebody's gone on a Zoom call, not realised their washing's in the background? It's like, yeah, suddenly you're preaching live during a pandemic. You're like, they can see my underwear on the washing line behind me. So it's being aware. So even if you're filming in like an auditorium or a main hall, what's on camera? Does it need to be there? Is it a distraction? Do you want it to be there? Because suddenly, when you see a whole room, everybody joining the line just sees that one frame. So have a think about what's in frame. Then with your phone, it can automatically adjust. If you're using like a little camera, has anybody heard of the word DSLR? Yeah, great. So like little mirrorless cameras. You've heard of like broadcast cameras and things like that. Some of those have manual settings, and it's just being aware, okay, if you're filming somebody like outside in the sun right now, and suddenly they're overexposed, it would look a little bit like this. So on the right-hand side is someone's hand. It's not mine, but you can see all the skin tone. You can see all of the like texture of the hand, the surface, and the tone. On the left-hand side, the knuckles are disappearing. You can't see any skin tone in the middle, no hair. You wouldn't even know what color the skin is in the middle. So on the left-hand side, that's what we'd call overexposed, where something's so bright it's lost all definition, all shape, all tone. On the right-hand side, it's perfectly exposed, where you can see it as it is with your eye. So when you're filming, it's keeping an eye on that. So it's like, okay, the sun's on their face. Have I lost all detail? Can you no longer see their nose and their mouth and their eyebrows? Again, quality and it's a distraction. Then with lighting, so maybe you're in a room where you're using lighting to film something. Maybe you've got some studio lights. Maybe you've got like a rig of lights, like in the auditorium there. Okay, how are you using them? Are some of the lights competing? For example, if I was stood with some stage lighting behind me, or maybe you're even stood outside and there's like a white wall behind you and the sun's on the white wall, suddenly what's brighter is behind you rather than you. And that may sound like, oh, I don't need the focus to be on me, but your eye is drawn to where's brightest. So if I walked into a room, the first thing that's going to stand out is the light, and then probably somebody's white t-shirt or like a paper. So it's all about, okay, what's your eye drawn to? So if you're filming somebody and they're darker than the background behind them, your eye's going to be drawn to the background as opposed to them. It's like it's one of those little details that makes a difference. So where you film somebody, make sure the subject, which is the person you're filming, is brighter than the background. Having it well lit and soft, if you can get some nice soft lighting so it's not really harsh, because for example, if you went and filmed in the sun, there's going to be just like concentration of light on one side of their face and a big shadow underneath. So if you can go somebody where maybe they're actually in the shade and suddenly they're a bit softer, cloudy days are nice. If you're inside, for example, you wouldn't want to film me directly under this because there's going to be a bright light on my side here. So if I stepped over here, it would then become a bit more even. If you're using studio lights, things like diffusion and diffusers, if you want to get really creative, get a big bed sheet and hang it up in front of a bright light and you'll see it softens it. It's all these little things that make it not as harsh on somebody's face. Add colour. God's creative. Have you ever seen a sunset? It's amazing. I recommend it if you haven't yet. But how beautiful and how interesting. If we want to talk about engagement, colours. Like it doesn't need to be completely plain, boring, stale, like you're in a dentist chair. So they like that one. So adding in some colour brings it to life. It gives it some creativity. It gives it some warmth. It gives it some interest. Your eyes suddenly become a bit more alive with what you're watching. We have that could be something as small as adding in some little Parkan lights that give a little bit of colour in the background. Just follow the same principles. It's not distracting. It serves the moment, so it's not strobing when somebody's trying to pray. But maybe if you are doing some sort of worship or praise where it's, this is an anthem, bring some energy into the lighting as well. Like reflect that, not just in the music, but in the sound, in the lighting, in the camera work. Reflect what's happening, serving the moment. Then you've got sound. Has anybody listened to a video where it's just distorting so much before? Yeah? Did you just skip it or turn it off? Yeah? You don't want it to be distorting. So looking at the volume. So there's ways that if you're using a recording unit, you can look at limiting the maximum volume. So when you're recording something, what you're listening out for, okay, is it distorting? Is it loud enough? Have you ever watched a video where you're like, can't hear a thing and I can't turn it up anymore either? So that volume, again, distraction, too loud, too quiet, distorting. But also, what else can you hear? So I was listening to a pod. I've got a little 3-year-old. We're listening to Story Time on Spotify. And suddenly they're telling a little story about the Gruffalo. And their phone goes off. I'm like, you've got a lot of followers on Spotify and your phone is going off in the middle of you telling a story. Super distracting. So if you're filming somebody, phone's on silence, things like that. Or maybe in the background you've got a dog barking. If they're listening in headphones at home and you're like saying something really powerful, but all they can hear is this Rottweiler just going for it, they're gone. Or even like a car horn, or somebody's laughing next door. So for example, if you were filming and you can just hear laughing, but you're talking about a sad story, what can you hear? So we talked about framing. What can you see? Hearing. Okay, what can I hear? Do I want to be hearing that in this video? No. Try and find a way to eliminate it in a good way. Don't just take the dog and drop him off down the road. So we talked about live streaming. So staging, backdrops, set design. So depending where you are, there's an endless array of what you can do to be interesting. We saw that image of the LED wall, the big TV. You can put loads of interesting things on there. In the auditorium here, you've got bits of colour. You can use things like wood. It's creating something. So if I was just being filmed here, it's pretty boring, right? You'd be like, oh, what's he trying to teach me? Is he telling me when my dentist appointment is? No, I'm trying to tell you the gospel, actually. It's like, okay, well, how can we make this interesting? Adding in some sort of textures. You can get creative with stage designs. I can help you with that. And you can get creative using lighting to make it come alive, make it engaging. What's the scene and what's the purpose and the audience? So all these things flow together. Because if you want a younger audience in your live stream, then you want to try and relate to that. You want to try and have it energetic, have some cool atmosphere, have some different lighting options going on, making that engaging, and setting the scene for it. And then we talked about, pre-recorded material, which is what we're also speaking on as well. Let me just make sure I've not skipped past anything here. Actually, let's quickly go on to framing. So if you're filming with DSLR, there's a few things which I can talk to you very quickly about this. Framing. Have you ever seen a video where they've chopped off the top of somebody's head? Or where they're right at the bottom of the screen and there's so much above them? Like, what's going on? They're either really short or the cameraman's really tall. Framing's super important. When you're filming somebody, Claire, would you mind standing up for me if that's okay? So if I'm filming Claire, I'm not going to be filming her up here, and I'm not going to be sat down and be like, go on then Claire, go for it. There's something like, if we're having a conversation, talking at eye level is personal and it's engaging, isn't it? So if I was to be filming Claire, let's say I was using my phone, you can imagine this as whatever camera you want to, I'd be like, okay, I'm filming it where her eye line is. So she's looking directly at the camera. Because I don't know about you, I've also seen it where I'm like, am I looking up to, thank you, Claire. Am I looking up to the person speaking or am I looking down them? I can see up their nostrils. Why is the cameraman sat down and they're not? So it's, okay, film at eye line so that you're making eye contact, it's engaging and it's personal. Framing, I don't know about you, but if you could set the camera up for the first time, you didn't know what you were doing, you just turned it on, you set it to wide and you're like, great, they can see everything. That's also not very personal and it's also not very engaging. You see this shot here, this is what we'd call like a close-up shot. So by having that, you feel like you're in a conversation with her because you're close. So that if you've got a room this size and you're like, yeah, we want to live stream and you wanted to film me, I'm like, why don't you film me here? This is like a close to mid shot instead of the whole room, because then suddenly it becomes really personal to the person behind the screen. And if you're like, oh yeah, but I want them to see what's behind the room, that's where you can maybe get in another camera and you can have a couple of options. You can have one that's close, one that's wide. Or if you were limited and there was a lot you did need to capture, then yes, you can widen it out. But the whole point is thinking about your framing. When it's close, it's personal, eye line personal. The headroom, we talked about not cutting off their head and not having too much room. You want a little bit of a breathing gap. As you can see here, there's a bit of a breathing gap above the head and either side, and that just gives you watching it a bit of breathing space, because your mind might get a bit overwhelmed, like they're really close to the edges all the time. The background, your eyes are okay, it is blurry, deliberate. So this is something that we call depth of field. And basically, again, as I said with lighting, your eye is drawn to what's in focus. If you put your hand in front of you here, your hand's in focus, you guys aren't. Hopefully, if you did the same, your hand would be in focus and I wouldn't be. It's because your eye is trying to focus on one thing, it can't focus on both. So if you can, in your phone, whether you've got a new iPhone or something similar, or in a DSLR camera, you can get away with getting a bit of a blurry background. It helps make it stand out and it shows you what you're focusing on. Here you go. Here's the lady that we've all seen where they've had their head chopped off. So the camera basics: eye line, framing, exposure. So I showed you that hand illustration, and then focus. Make sure they're in focus. If they're blurry, that's not the right thing. The background's good to be blurry, but you want to see the person that you're talking to. Quick audio basics. Don't worry, we will finish up shortly. Then they've got some. You can ask some questions. Audio basics. If you are putting on a microphone, so they've put this little head thing on because they want to record it for them. Get the microphone as close to the person speaking as possible. So if you've got one of these little clip-on collar mics, they're called lav mics. That's great because that's right near their face. If I'm trying to pick up you, Claire, from here, and I'm like, I'm interviewing Claire, she's going to be really, really distant, and you'll hear all the cars and the leaves and things like that. Get as close as you can, but then also serve in the moment. So you don't want to, if it's filming Claire and I'm just stood here with a microphone right in her eye, then for everybody on camera's like, I can't see anything, but it sounds great. Then it's the wrong balance. So looking at between the two, okay, if I can get a microphone as close as I can without it being distracting and with it still being like sensible visually, that means it's going to be as clear and as good as possible. The level, it's not distorting because it's too loud, but it's at a good level that it's not too quiet. You want them to also project themselves as well. Clear projection. If they mumble, it'll come across their mumbling and it will seem that they don't have any passion about what they're speaking on. Distracting noises, we've already spoken about that. Get rid of the barking dog, turn your phone off, and things like that. Lighting basics. So there's something called 3-point lighting. If I was to stand here, you could put a light that's kind of like at 2 o'clock to me or 11 o'clock, whichever way you look at it, and point that on me, and that would be what you call your key light, and that's going to light me the most. If you've got like a stage or some like darker background, if you put a light that's somewhere out of shot pointed onto the back of my head, suddenly you're going to have light fall on my shoulders and on my head that's going to make me stand out and give me some shape. And then there's a third light, which is what you could call like your fill light. You don't need to worry about that. But when thinking of lighting, think of a light in front of the person and then a light on the back of them, and suddenly their shoulders and their head are going to be lit and they'll stand out from the background, and it just gives them some shape. Even, you don't want a really harsh light on the side of their face and that's it. So it's looking at, okay, how can I soften it? Like I mentioned, diffusing the light, or put them in somewhere where it's shady. If you're on stage, how can you make it even? So if they're walking across the stage, suddenly they go really, really dark, really, really bright, really, really dark. Suddenly it's like, oh, that's distracting, which goes back to our foundations. So it's like, okay, create an even light across the stage. How do you do that? Balance the lights. Play around with it, have a little test. And non-competing, which I spoke about. If the background is really, really bright, but you haven't got enough light on the person speaking, I'm going to be staring at the wall behind them as opposed to them speaking. Software. Hands up if you've edited. Oh, amazing. What have you edited?
So, edited talks with music before. I used something called Filmora.
Okay. How did you find it?
It took me ages.
Yeah.
You know, bringing the music in,
Yep.
putting words on the top. It was fun, but it took hours.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes you give up because you want to do a talk, but you want it to introduce it.
Yeah, you did a 45-minute message, but you spent 4.5 days trying to edit it.
That's it.
Yeah. Has anybody else edited? iMovie, classic. Yeah. How did you find it?
It took a long time.
Yeah.
But what I found was then when we transferred it from my computer to Apple, actually the sound was all into balance.
Yeah. Yeah. There's anybody else edited? Yeah.
I've used Camtasia to do a bunch of work stuff and church stuff.
Amazing. How did you find it?
I found the basics of it really quite easy. Then getting into some of the more advanced stuff out there takes a while, and I easily get led astray by again, taking 3 days to do like a 20-minute thing.
Yeah.
Probably could have done it in like half an hour and just not spent an hour on a graphic.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Which takes back to that first slide I showed you where you're like, what's the point? I'm not even going to bother. This is taking me 4 days. Is it really going to make any difference? A few basics. So similar to the why, not the what. So the ability, hiya, welcome. No matter what software you're using, so you were saying iMovie, you've got things like Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro, things like that. Doesn't matter what you're using, but the principles are still the same. If you can find a software that works for you where you can cut. So if you film something, maybe there's like 4 or 5 takes that didn't go too well, there's mumbling at the start. If you can find somewhere you can cut the footage, which is like the video, and you can delete it, great, that's a good step. So find software that works for you. It can be free, it can be a paid for subscription. If you can cut it, great. Then if you can then, obviously that enables you to also bring clips together. So if you wanted to add different footage together, exporting. You need to be able to export it for what you're using. So if you're using it for Facebook or YouTube or your website or Vimeo, whatever it is, as long as you've got a way to export it and achieve the settings that you need. So if you're like, okay, I need it to be in HD or I want it to be, because sometimes social media, you need the file size to be a lot smaller because it needs to load quicker. So sometimes like, okay, I need to just be able to reduce the quality. Audio. If you've got a way to bring music in, like you were saying, if you've got a way to bring in some audio and you can sync it up with your visual, then that's great. And graphics, which is what you said you were spending 3 days on at the back. A way to add text. Maybe it's, because if, for example, I saw you online, I'd never met you before, I'd be like, who's this guy? What's his name? And you may verbally see it, but for me, I'm a visual learner. So then by having maybe your name come up at the bottom of the screen, suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm learning something. Maybe you could have scriptures come up at the bottom of the screen. So software basics, if you can cut it, if you can add audio in, if you can do exporting and maybe add some graphics, it doesn't matter what you're using, the principle is the same, being able to do those things. Let's have a look. What else we got? Amazing. So the last thing is teams. We've all been there where you want to do something, but you can't because you don't have the people. And you're like, God, please, would you give me someone? Sarah mentioned it, and I mentioned it a minute ago with the example is, if you've got someone that's willing, then they can learn. And I also believe prayer is powerful, right? Who believes prayer works? I do. Pray for those people. God, would you send me one person that is willing that could do this, and work with that one person? But then if you've got a slightly larger team, maybe you've got 10, 20 people in your production events team, and you've got a lot of different components together, they need to work together. So maybe you've got a camera team of 5 people, maybe you've got a lighting technician, maybe you've got a sound technician and a video switcher guy. All these different components need to work together in unity. But it's also important, as we said, about teaching them why we do what we do, not just what, because then as things change, they can keep up with that. But then also, okay, how can you replicate yourself? So if you've invested all of your time into something, you're like, okay, great, you now know everything about a camera. What happens if they get called to go somewhere else, or they're a student and they go to a different university? It's like, okay, I've taught you everything you know, find somebody else and teach it to them as well. Mobilize that. One of the things I believe God was speaking to me about over the last 12 to 18 months is mobilizing his church. And we're speaking about how this pandemic, in a way, I think, has forced the church to mobilize to be more digital. So if we can equip people to be a bit more tech savvy, they understand the foundations of what's good, what principles are good, then they become then modern day missionaries where they can go somewhere with a backpack with a laptop and a phone, and suddenly they can reach anyone. And there's no limits to it. So for me, I'm passionate about, okay, equipping, but also getting them to train up somebody else so they can replicate themselves. Building the consistency. If you've got then a couple of people, one's really good, one's not, invest that training in them. Make sure they're up to the same standard, because getting that consistency, when you watch BBC News day in, day out, it's not all the best, is it? Let's be honest, but you've got that consistency. If you're watching the same show you love or the same TV series, episode to episode, the consistency's there. You know what to expect. With our online events, or even just your brand like perception as such online. So I know what to expect from Cornerstone because I watch it regularly. It's getting that consistency between your people. I would also recommend that someone oversee it. I've had people where I've trained up a group of people and then moved somewhere else, and then there was nobody keeping an eye on that sort of situation. Slowly over time, we're sheep, right? So sometimes we slowly start to stray away, and it's keeping people in line. So you may be like, oh, I've taught you 5 times how to do this right. You have to keep on top of it. it's pastoring people, right? Discipling people. It's like, I've told you how to read the Bible. I've told you how to stay free, but they're people, and you've got to keep them going in the same direction. So if you can, I imagine we've got a whole demographic of people. I imagine we've got some pastors in here. We've got some team leaders in here. Then it's having somebody that can overlook that and make sure, okay, yeah, we're staying on the direction we want to go on. Give them vision. Because after 4 or 5 months, once they're familiar with what they do and they've done it 20, 30 times, without vision, as we heard, in a way they'll perish. They'll get bored. They may want to go and do something else. If you explain to somebody, hey, you film this message today so that somebody at home who's got anxiety or depression can hear the gospel, that's why we're going to do what we're going to do, and that's why we're going to keep doing it as well. Yeah, we'll change the method, but we're going to keep reaching people because we see that there's hope for people. So by giving them the vision, when things get familiar or when things get down the road 6 months on, they're going to stick into it. I've had people that have done the same thing for, like, been in the same team for a few years. They're like, yeah, because we keep hearing testimony of people getting saved and set free through what we do with technology. And then, as I said, last one, willingness. Look for those that are willing, and I believe the Holy Spirit can equip the rest. So that in a nutshell, I know it says about live streaming. I've talked about pre-recorded content, live streaming and events, and I know that's a whole lot of things I've spoken about. Maybe you came today wanting to know a list of equipment to buy. I can help you with that. That's what I do. So my background is I basically help churches and equip them with technology, but also with the training and the facilities to help them move forwards, and so that they don't just rely on me, but they can run by themselves as well, and for the secular world. But also, hopefully, you've now heard a bit of a foundation of, okay, I've got a phone, or yeah, I can get access to a camera. I can now do something. So I'm going to open it up for some questions. Ask what absolutely anything you want. If you want to talk about food, I love food, but let's try and keep it to something relating to this, and I'll try and help you. If not, we can have a chat afterwards if it's more specific. So if anybody has any questions at all, go for it.
There's a lot of keenness in our church to invest in this space, but also a lot of other needs in the church and attention and funding. We've got a leaky roof, we've got various things
classic,
going on,
yeah.
and how do I campaign to be like, currently if you watch our live streams on a TV or a laptop rather than a phone, all you can see of someone's face is just probably the colour of their skin, to be honest. It's like a camera from like 2004.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, is there particular places that are more willing to fund this? I find funding for kind of roofs maybe, and for older church buildings, but there's less immediate funding.
Funding, finances, the fun one, hey?
Yeah.
I get it, I do. And it's like, okay, what? For example, why do we need, I don't know, moving lights or lasers or haze machines or things like that? Why do we need it? It's like, okay, well, you can look at why. And at the end of the day, it's down to each church to make their own decision on what they want to invest in. And there will always be needs. Everything has a need, right? There's left, right, and centre. Who's going to shout the loudest? And for me, I think it's okay if you put together a vision of like, I want to reach people behind the lens, or there's like a specific burden you've got. Like, God, you're burdening me. You're giving me a passion for people behind the lens, or like people at home. Is like, okay, put together a plan of, okay, if we spent this amount of money, or maybe you need help, I can help you with putting together some sort of plan. It's like, okay, what do we do? Where do we start? So part of, off the back of today, if you are there and you're like, this is all great, but I still don't know where to start, chat to me afterwards and I can give you like contact details and things like that, and I can try and help you in that direction. But I think in terms of funding, yeah, it's a fun one. I've been in many situations. Yeah, I know, right? Like the church I'm a part of, our vision is always so much bigger than our bank account. And I think that's part of like building church, right? And I think at some point you're like, okay, when are we going to do this? And it's been like, okay, is now the time? We've got to do it. Looking at some sort of scale, start somewhere. So maybe you don't need to spend 10 grand, but maybe you are going to need to spend £1,000. And it's campaigning that. So with one of ours, we'd been running broadcasting for maybe like 10, 15 years. And we were like, okay, we need to now reinvest because some of our equipment's getting old. So then I was like, I was really burdened. I was like, our quality's dropping. And I believe that those watching at home deserve like the best quality possible, distraction free. So I was like, I'm happy to put together some sort of offering and to build a vision. So I did. I was like, I've got a vision, guys, that we need to update our equipment. This is what it's going to cost. This is why we're doing it. And it's speaking on the why. He's like, I want to reach far more people and I want it to be good quality. And at the moment, we don't have the resource for that. And like we saw a couple of dozen £100,000 come in, so tens of thousands of pounds over time. But I think also God did that. And again, it's scale. So maybe for you, it's like, if we manage to get £500, great. But people buy into vision, they buy into why. Because then we also didn't quite meet our target. So I went back to my team and I was like, hey, there's about 30 people in the team. I was like, hey, we need to raise £2,000 to meet this target. And I was like, I'm not forcing any of us, but I don't know about you, but I reckon we can do that between us. And we did. So you never know. You never know what God can bring in, and it tends to be last minute as well, right? So hopefully that answers your question. They seem to love it as well next door.
Can I say as well, there are grants available, because we had £11,000. I'll find out for you where we had it from. But we had a grant for £11,000.
Yeah. Yeah, you can,
The lottery as well. I think it's the big lottery you can.
yeah, you can, yeah. Yeah, so there are various grants, as you said, that are available. I only know of a couple. I don't know of a huge amount. But yeah, it's great. Anybody else?
Planning to meet you after this talk.
I'll text.
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
You do training sessions, etc.
Yeah. So yeah, I believe. I think, long story short, God's, I believe, equipped me to equip the church, and I'm just super passionate about. We're all one church, right? One body from different locations, and I'm like, if we can get as many churches online and mobile as we can and thriving, then I want to help that. So yeah, what I do for part of a living is I equip churches for events, live streaming, like digital media, social media, and things like that. So I've done that for a few different people. So yeah, that is what I do for part of a living.
So you're based in Swansea?
Cardiff.
Cardiff.
But travel all around Wales, but also for the church that I'm a part of, we have about 34, 35 locations in different continents. So do a lot of work with overseas digitally as well. So yeah, that I help in any way, really. Yeah.
There's a lot of teaching on YouTube, isn't there, for streaming
Is there?
in churches?
Yes, you can find a lot of different platforms of, okay, how do you get up and running a streaming Teradek box, or how do you get the right format for social media, those sorts of things as well. So yeah, you can find a lot of material on YouTube, and it's tying that together with then the foundations of, okay, why are we doing this? What's the foundations behind it? And you can tie in then the technical knowledge from things like YouTube, and then yeah, it's good. Yeah.
There's a minute and a half left on my watch. Is it very quick, you talk a lot about, technology and equipment and, effectively what's kind of behind the camera. I'm quite interested in what's in front of the camera.
Great.
Because, any quick hints or suggestions as to where people might go to, because, it's the way it's always done, or that's who I am type stuff.
Oh yeah, classic. Yeah.
They look awful.
Yeah.
And don't effectively communicate with their faces,
Mhm.
with words, issues of that nature. Where would you suggest people go for that?
As in how to address it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having an honest culture, obviously speaking at the right time in the right place. So maybe not as they're about to deliver the camera, be like, oh, by the way, last time, tell your face you're happy because it was awful. Not the right time. So the right time in the right place. But having that honest culture of like, hey, so the foundation is distraction free. So if they look a mess, it's a distraction. And it's not serving that purpose properly. So it's been like, okay, as a vision and as a foundation, what we're working from, can all those bullet points go across it. So it'd be like, hey, I want this video to be distraction free. So let's look sharp. Let's look at what we're wearing. Because even things like really close stripes, so potentially your shirt, but maybe a bit closer, can play up on camera and things like that. Bright red can also play up as well.
Almost done.
Yeah, we'll finish up now. So what people are wearing. So have a conversation beforehand in the planning. So looking at that planning beforehand, what's the goal? Okay, so what are you wearing? But if somebody, it really isn't good on camera, you've got to have the conversation at some point in a really honouring way. Because otherwise we're not being loving, because we're letting them, in a way, make a bit of a fool of themselves, because nobody's going to watch it. People that do watch it are never going to want to watch it again. So you're like, hey, if we're going to be on camera, maybe set a culture. It's about, hey, if you're going to be on camera, we want you to have energy, we want you to have passion, look directly at the lens, be confident in what you're saying, and get them to prepare as well, so they're not trying to make it up on the spot, so they know what they're saying. So the more planning and production you can do beforehand, hopefully will help them when they do get in front of camera. Does that help?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Just wanted to chuck something in the pond.
Yeah, in front of the camera is so important. So training on speaking, because cameras is fun. Suddenly, when you look at a lens, you suddenly go stay shy. So practice, planning.
Some people actually, and I count myself amongst them, hate watching themselves being videoed.
Oh, and I think everybody does.
In which case, you're not actually in a very good position to judge whether that is good, bad, indifferent, or amazing.
Yeah. So just set a safe space to positively critique it and be like, okay, how did this come across? Did this achieve what we wanted it to? What can we change next time? And I think that should help. Any last questions quickly before we got to finish?
Is there any way of contacting you except for?
Yeah. So I've got some contact details on some cards, so I'll just have them here. So feel free to come and have a chat. Anybody else pressing question?
Quick then. You were saying about different platforms, different durations of time. So I mean, if you want to broadcast a worship service or a debate talk, I take it that's going to exclude certain platforms that only allow very short clips.
Yeah.
Spotify,
Yeah.
I noticed I watch things like Christian Concerns Round the Table talk they do once a week, and I think they broadcast that on Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah.
Live.
Yeah, so Facebook and YouTube, you can. There's no limit. Something like a Snapchat or like a TikTok, which some people may not know what they are. That purpose of that social media isn't for long videos, so it just won't. Whether you can or not is one question. Whether it works is another. But for example, some types of Instagram settings, it's limited to 90 seconds, so you physically can't, and you can only stream into certain platforms as well. So does that answer your question? Amazing. I think it is it's a break now, isn't it? Yeah, so feel free if you want to come and have a chat, but for the rest of you, if you do want to leave, thank you so much for coming. Hopefully that was helpful in some way.